I'm Marcy Roan, and I'm a school leadership coach. I'm here today to talk to you about what school leaders can learn from the medical field. Did you know there is a phenomenon in the medical field known as the July effect, or if you're in the UK, the killing season? This is a time when newly graduated doctors flood hospitals, bringing enthusiasm, but also the potential for medical errors. To mitigate this, the medical community employs a practice called medical rounds, which utilizes collective knowledge to improve patient care. Doctors and medical residents gather in patient rooms to discuss observations, treatments, and patient responses. This process builds a collaborative community, all for the purpose of increasing success and impact of patient care. What if we could leverage this approach in our schools to strengthen teaching practices, build capacity, and foster a culture of learning and accountability? Instructional rounds in education can harness the collective wisdom and experience of educators to drive school improvement and increase student achievement. The rounds approach holds a powerful promise for improving schools. This collective learning approach builds capacity, provides job-embedded professional development, increases retention of quality staff, and strengthens a culture of learning and accountability. You might be wondering, does this really work? Well, the evidence speaks for itself. Research has shown that schools implementing instructional rounds experience remarkable improvements in student achievement. In fact, a study conducted by Jennifer Gore and her colleagues found that students with teachers who regularly participated in rounds showed 25% more progress in math than students with teachers who did not participate in rounds. A study conducted by Harvard University found schools that implemented instructional rounds saw improvements in teacher practice and student achievement. Teachers who participated in rounds reported changes in their instructional approaches, such as implementing research-based strategies, providing timely feedback, and utilizing effective classroom management techniques. These changes resulted in increased student engagement, academic progress, and overall achievement. These are powerful testaments to the impact of collective learning and the potential a rounds approach holds for transforming schools. The process of conducting regular rounds as a principal had a profound effect on my leadership and the improvement of my schools. I have implemented a rounds approach at the elementary and middle grades and learned lessons along the way that honed how I implemented the approach. My journey to incorporate a rounds process in my schools all began with a personal experience when a family member faced a medical emergency, and after several hospital transfers, led us to a teaching hospital. It was in this environment that I witnessed the power of the rounds process to accelerate healing. It was after I watched how doctors leveraged the power of collective learning that I began planning in earnest a similar process for my own school buildings. Replicating this process in a school building wasn't without challenges, and I learned from each experience a few key moves that ultimately created a strong foundation for conducting rounds with teachers. I'd like to share 3 of these key leader moves with you today. The only way to improve learning is to improve teaching. Strengthening the instructional practices and capacity of those in your building is the cornerstone of any school administrator's job. Traditionally, the onus falls on the school principal and the assistant principals to monitor instruction and provide feedback to individual teachers. This current approach is highly dependent on the administrators to build the capacity of teachers. If your schedule is anything like mine as a principal, observation and feedback was one of the most challenging tasks to maintain. However, if we think like the medical field, we can leverage educators in the building to improve the instructional practice of all teachers. Rounds can be used as a continual systemic means of school improvement. To implement a practice of instructional rounds in schools, leaders can take 3 key moves to lay the foundation for strengthening capacity and supporting school improvement efforts. I have found that spending time on building a strong foundation was critical to the long-term success of rounds in my buildings. Key leader move 1. Build a culture of growth, learning, and trust. The first move is to cultivate a culture that values growth, learning, and trust. This begins with educating staff and establishing a collective understanding and vision. Administrators can start by sharing a clear vision of growth, learning, and trust. Leaders can also share articles on the impact and process of rounds and engage in conversations about learning from one another. If you already have a consistent pattern of regular visits to classrooms, this is a great start. But a significant difference between an existing walkthrough schedule and the rounds process is in the purpose of what is seen and the presence of feedback. If you have a walkthrough process currently in place, the main purpose is to provide feedback for the teacher based on your observation. The primary purpose of learning rounds is to engage the learning rounds group in the examination of teaching and learning, not to provide feedback to the individual teacher. The inclusion of a rounds process that does not focus on feedback to the individual teacher sends a powerful message about the purpose of this work. Taking time to build a culture of growth, learning, and trust is a critical step in the success of your learning rounds process. Failure to take time to establish a culture that is supportive of this extremely vulnerable process can do more harm in the long run, as teachers may become critical of the process and see it more as a gotcha experience. Opening classrooms as learning labs for a school is a level of vulnerability for the observer and the observed that may be new for many staff. Take the time to evaluate your staff's comfort level with an understanding of the purpose and process for learning rounds. Another part of building the culture of reflection is making sure that we know the baseline for where to begin. This means spending time going over data. This could be both formative and summative assessment data, informal data, and anecdotal data, such as the information you've already gathered through classroom walkthroughs. Key Leader Move 2. Look for willingness. Next, leaders should identify and involve teachers who are willing to embrace change and consistently seek opportunities for improvement. These early adopters will serve as valuable champions for the rounds process. The overarching goal is to ensure equitable opportunities for all teachers to participate in a consistent and frequent manner. You may have an idea of which teachers you want to start conducting rounds with you, but you won't start by including teachers yet. At the beginning of the year, start your learning walks with the instructional or admin team to see what you see, based on your communicated expectations, vision, and school improvement actions. Walking with your instructional or administrative teams first helps to send the message that we're all involved with the learning and are of one accord. Once you've conducted a few rounds and get a sense for what you see across the building, you may need to clarify some expectations, vision, and school improvement actions. Doing a refresher with teachers if needed before you start a rounds process is helpful, as it sets a baseline for all and limits the interpretation of the gotcha approach. So let's talk about the classroom visit. Starting with an open mind and without any preconceived notions, leaders and teachers can observe classrooms. You want to start visiting classrooms without anything to write on or with. Over time, you'll use a structured note-taking method to focus on the teaching actions and how they affect students. This sends a message regarding the purpose of this endeavor. It's essential to emphasize that this process is non-evaluative, fostering an environment where teachers perceive that information collected and feedback provided are solely intended for their professional growth. Group visits in a classroom may be a shift for many teachers. They'll worry about what the group saw, and even in the case of an already reflective teacher, beg for some feedback. Before you go off pulling teachers to conduct rounds and taking up meeting times for a rounds process, it's important to retain the core purpose of the rounds process. It's not simply about walking around, looking at classrooms, and getting some good ideas. It's about reflection on the adult actions that are having an impact on student learning. It's a reflective process, which leads to the third key leader move. Key leader move 3, make time for reflection. Because reflection is at the core of a rounds process, it's important that we schedule the rounds process with designated opportunities to reflect and discuss. The reflection can occur after each classroom or after all rounds are conducted. It's critical that we spend time not just thinking about what we saw and heard, but holding each other accountable to the evidence. Building the language of evidence, accountability, and growth is not always natural, so be prepared to facilitate. When you begin talking about what you see in a classroom, one question should become the standard for your discussion. What evidence did you see? So when a participant comes out of a room you've just observed and comments, "Wow, that was a great lesson," the follow-up question should be, "What was your evidence for that?" The question of evidence not only supports a calibration of what makes a great lesson, but it forces our thinking to be supported by the evidence we see and hear. The purpose of learning rounds is to build reflective practice around teaching and learning. And it's for this purpose that we don't want to just wander into teachers' classrooms and have observers just take notes of what they see. It would not serve the purpose well if we took that approach and observers left with ideas around room arrangement, bulletin board design, or cute worksheets that could not be tied to the impact of adult action on student learning. While identifying impact is our ultimate goal, we do need to start building reflective muscle. For the initial learning rounds, I have a very simple 2-column note-taking form that focuses the observer on the actions of the teacher and the actions of the students. Exceptional school leaders succeed because of how they use their time. These leaders recognize the importance of developing the practice and impact of teaching on learning. Dr. Atul Gawande shares in his book, Better, A Surgeon's Notes on Performance, in medicine, as in any profession, we must grapple with systems, resources, circumstances, people, and in our own shortcomings as well. Yet somehow, we must advance, we must refine, we must improve. This is to live a life of responsibility. The question then is not whether one accepts the responsibility just by doing this work one has. The question is, having accepted the responsibility, how does one do such work well? Educators share similar responsibility to prepare our students for the future. By adopting a practice from the medical field, instructional rounds, we can enhance teaching practices, build reflective practitioners, and ultimately improve student achievement. Just as doctors continually refine and improve their practice, we too must advance and refine our practices. Let's embrace the challenge of creating a culture of collective learning, where we learn from each other's expertise, build capacity, and hold ourselves accountable to evidence-based practices. School leader responsibility lies in the preparation, development, and assurance that those charged with growing students perform at their peak. Systems such as rounds allow us to examine our practice and the resulting impact in real time. Remember, the question is not whether we accept the responsibility. By choosing this profession, we already have. The question is, how do we do this work well? And Instructional Rounds provides a powerful path to achieving excellence. If you're interested in learning more about how to integrate a learning rounds process that builds reflective practitioners, check out my book, Learning Rounds with Teachers, Building Reflective Practitioners. For free forms and resources to get you started, visit bit.ly/leadlearnersroan and click on the resources link. Also, check out these other resources on the topic of rounds in education.